Hello and welcome to Module 3. To recap Module 2, we learned how to charge the glasses and the duration of time that is required to fully charge the glasses. So this module should at the least be viewed 5 hours after having started Module 2 or having started charging the glasses. Assuming that's all done and the glasses are charged, let's go to how to set up the processor unit with the player and the display. And I'll show you right here. All right, the very first thing that we want to make certain before we start the connectivity is that we do have HDMI cables. Now for this setup, you need 2 HDMI cables. And these cables need to be high-speed HDMI cables. So if you have an older installation or older cables, you absolutely want to be certain that you have high-speed HDMI cables. If you do not have HDMI cables, I'll show you. Here's an HDMI cable, and there's actually a company that makes these HDMI cables. You can look them up on 3D Now website and place an order for these cables. The length of the cables will obviously depend on your installation, and you'll have to specify that when you place an order. So once again, we should have 2 HDMI cables. The purpose of 2 HDMI cables is that from the processor, one cable goes out of the processor to the player, and the other cable goes from the processor to the display. Now, how do they do that, or what's the simplest way of looking at it is, if you look right here on the processor, there's an HDMI in on one side and HDMI out on the other side. Now, HDMI in obviously is an input in. So this is the cable that will be going to the player or coming from the player and going in here. So once again, making sure that we've got this right, that HDMI in connector receives the HDMI cable from the player. HDMI out receives the cable from the display, whether it be a projector or a television. Now, what are the other connectors that are on this processor? I have my power connector. I know my power cable goes here. I've got a service USB connector. This is if I wanted to get a firmware upgrade, and that will be announced on the website. If and when that happens, then we will be guiding you on how to use that. That is ineffective for this installation purposes. Then I've got these 3 LEDs, and they're clearly marked Power Link 3D. And we'll go through each one and show you the functionality of each one of those. On the other side, I have a connector that looks like a 3-pin DIN connector, and it's clearly marked again. It says emitter sync, and we'll show you how a cable goes in there and how to sync the emitter to the processor and then to the glasses. And then next to it is HDMI. We talked about that. And then there are 2 dip switches. Now the dip switches are marked dip switch number 1 and dip switch number 2. Dip switch number 1 functionality is related to whether it is a 120 Hz display or 60 Hz display that you're installing. If it is in the up position, it is 120 Hz. When it is in down position, it's 60 Hz. And we'll cover that more in detail in other modules in terms of if you do not know what your display capabilities are, you'll be able to easily tell from moving this dip switch up or down. The second dip switch, or number 2 dip switch, is inactive. Leaving it in the top up position is recommended. However, it doesn't affect the performance whether it's in the up or down position. Next to it is another button. It's called SBS/TNB, which is side by side and top and bottom. Now, these are 2 formats that usually are used by your satellite or cable provider when they send the contents. Blu-ray and 3D Blu-ray movies are frame packed. This button doesn't come into any functionality because the 3D Blu-ray contents are directly sent in 3D to the display, and no manual interaction is required to change the contents to 3D. Once again, in later modules, we'll cover when you need to press this push button to change side-by-side contents to 3D contents, or top and bottom contents to 3D contents. So that's what the box looks like. Now I have the box set up right here in the center, and I'm going to make sure, I will do it this way. So I'll make sure that my HDMI in is towards my player. I have a player right here. This is a 3D Blu-ray player, and I've got a projector, which is my display on this side, and that is going to have a HDMI cable come from there and go to the HDMI out. The box needs to be the last device in your setup, in your connection to the display. So if you happen to have a receiver or a switch or a matrix, if it is a rack-mounted solution of any kind, you want to make certain that the box is the last device before the projector. The box supports 5.1 audio and 2-channel stereo audios, so you want to make certain that the audio is set up properly for this particular box. Box outputs 720p, and it can be upscaled to 1080p depending on the projector. Other than that, you want to make sure that your power is on your player and on your projector. Everything is set properly. The power cables are on there. HDMI cables are there. HDMI cables get connected. I'll put my HDMI into my player, and then I take the other end and I put HDMI cable into my HDMI in on the processor, and then I connect one HDMI cable to my projector, and I take the other end and I connect it to my processor. So this is a standard setup, and we recommend that you use a similar setup initially, even if you have receivers and matrix or switches and other devices, amplifiers, whatnot. First, in order to ensure that the processor is functioning properly, we recommend this setup. And this will help you to determine the processor is functioning correctly. And after that, you can actually unhook it and put it into your setup, whatever you might have. So here's a basic setup that I've covered. Kevin, would you like to add anything to this setup?
Just for the installer community, with respect to the high-speed HDMI cables, if you are looking to retrofit the processor into a theater that's 4 to 5 years old, you need to check the cables to make sure they are in fact high speed, because in many cases they may not be. So this is a great troubleshooting opportunity for you to make sure that you have the right cables, or you will not have a successful installation.
Indeed, excellent point, Kevin. Furthermore, you want to make certain that any and all devices that are connected into the chain are 3D ready, i.e. they will allow 3D signal to pass through. Kevin, you're quite aware of the fact that there are some devices that are older that actually do not support 3D signal, and that these switches or matrix or for the matter receivers will block a 3D signal, and then you will have problems with your connectivity. So ensuring that all the devices are 3D ready is very important. Now, you could do so by contacting the manufacturer of the device and requesting for that information. Some of this information is available at 3D now, however, it's rather difficult to have answer to all the devices and their capabilities and the model numbers, and whether those model numbers do support 3D signal or not. So we advise that you should contact the manufacturer and have that being taken care of it before going forward, because that will have a lot of impact on whether you're going to be able to do a successful installation or not. So that is a setup between a projector and a 3D Blu-ray. Next, we're going to show you a setup between a television and a DirecTV satellite box, which would be different for different countries and different areas. However, the functionalities are very much the same. All right, so now I'm taking you to another setup that we have, and this setup includes a DirecTV receiver, 3D Now processor, and a television. This happens to be an LG television, and I will show you the similarities in terms of the connectivity. There is really no difference between connecting this setup or the setup we just experienced with a projector and a 3D Blu-ray. I've got an HDMI cable coming out of the DirecTV receiver. This is the other end, so it's the first end is plugged into the DirecTV receiver. Here's the other end, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it into the HDMI in on the box, and of course a cable coming in from the television, and it's got a little tag that shows me display cable, so I can't make any mistakes there, and I'm plugging it into the HDMI out. Always remember, HDMI out is for the display, HDMI in is for the input or the player. This is our connection. Now, this is a simple connection, but this is to really show you and make certain that you have tested that the processor works. Highly recommended, again, that you do this first when you receive the product, whether you're an end user or you're an installer. You want to do this to make sure that the processor functions completely and accurately. Because once you put it into a device chain that includes other components, you want to be certain that you had a handshake between the player and the display and the product function. That then removes the doubt factor that the product may or may not be functioning, or my player or my display are incompatible. That part is being then proven that it works, and then any issues that might occur then in the connectivity will have to be with the devices, the additional devices that you will add on to it. So here, this is all what I need to show you the connectivity. In this case, this television is actually 60 Hertz. I know that, so I'll begin by having the dip switch number 1 in the down position, as you can see. If I didn't know that this was a 60 Hertz, I can have it up and then just play it. And what I'll see is either nothing on the screen or an error message, a format error message of some sort. And if you get that, all you need to do is take the dip switch into a down position, power cycle the processor again, take the power cable out, put it back in, and wait to see if you get the image onto the television. And if you do so, then you have confirmed that your television is a 60 Hertz television. And there are lots of televisions out in the market that advertise themselves as 120 Hertz, 240 Hertz, 480 Hertz, 600 Hertz, and so on and so forth. Really, most of them are 60 Hertz television. And one way to prove that, or to know that to be true, is go ahead and start with dip switch number 1 in the up position, and most likely you're not going to see an image on the screen. But when you take it down and power cycle it again, you will see the image. And if you do see the image, then you know that your television, or it may be a projector, can only accept an input of 60 Hertz. It does some interpolation to that input to make it look like 120 Hertz or beyond, but it really can only accept an input of 60 Hertz. So having said that, we can move on to module 4, and then we're going to do simple tests which are going to then guide us through the connectivity process, and we'll go from power to link to 3D LEDs and show you how each one should light and when it should light, to show that our setup is going correctly.